Well, we are seeing leaders, political leaders from across the country, premiers, federal leaders, including the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, all reacting to this threat by Donald Trump. Poilievre today saying Canadians buy a lot from Americans. We need a federal government that will go and speak directly to them to try and get a better deal for both Canada and the United States. Here's more from Pierre Poilievre.
We go to those vendors and say, listen, we need a free trade deal that allows us to exchange our goods and services without tariffs because it's in your interest. And that kind of pressure from the ground up will, I think, help convince President Trump to make a deal that will be both good for Canada and the United States. He is, after all, a deal maker.
And there was once a book called The Art of the Deal, wasn't there? Let's bring in CTV's Rachel Aiello, who is standing by in Ottawa with more, tracking this all. And there's a lot going on here, whether it's on the provincial front and Doug Ford. We heard from the Premier of Quebec earlier today, François Legault, David Eby out in British Columbia, and their Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. Meantime, the Liberal cabinet wrapping up their meeting on this relationship as Trump returns to the White House. What's the latest here, Rachel, from Ottawa?
Yeah, Todd. So today, the Prime Minister made good on a promise that he made to premiers last week when they met in person, that as soon as Donald Trump was inaugurated, he would be meeting with the premiers weekly. So that meeting did take place earlier today. It was a virtual call with all of Canada's premiers and the Prime Minister. And according to a senior government source speaking to my colleague, Mike Lecouture, some of the things that were discussed in that premiers meeting today were interprovincial trade barriers. There really does, Todd, seem to be a push from all levels of government here to try to see what they could do more to break down interprovincial trade barriers, to try to boost domestic economic security and markets. Trying to encourage Canadians to buy Canadian would be easier if there's more products to choose from across the country. And then the second part of that conversation, we're told, had to do with the border measures and whether there could be more things that the provinces are doing in their own jurisdictions to help the federal government's $1.3 billion border security plan get a little bit more beefed up. So that is what we're hearing has come out of this meeting with premiers, and we are expecting these conversations to happen on a weekly basis going forward as Canada braces for and then potentially has to respond to this Trump tariff threat.
Obviously, it's tricky as well for the leaders of the opposition parties to try and navigate this. They are not in power. In the case of Pierre Poilievre, he could be a few months from now, who knows? But, trying to figure out how much or little to push. Easier for the NDP to go on the attack against Donald Trump, no doubt.
Yeah, certainly. We heard that from Jagmeet Singh just a little while ago, saying that Trump is a bully. He only responds to strength, and Canada needs to respond with strength. Also taking aim at Elon Musk and making suggestions that Canada be looking at its critical minerals as a place to hold back, to put pressure on the United States. And we did also hear from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre a bit more today on what he would do if he was Prime Minister dealing with Trump, suggesting that, yes, similar to the government's approach right now, there would have to be retaliatory tariffs, but then he would be looking to try to find economic allies south of the border, American businesses who can help them make the case to the U.S. administration that this cross-border trade action hits on both economies and costs consumers on both sides. So this is an interesting time, Todd, right now, because we've got both the opposition party leaders kind of gaming out how they would handle Trump because, like you said, either of them could be in power in just a few months' time. But then also this is playing very much into the federal Liberal leadership race. And we heard from the newest entrant into that race, Ruby Dalla, earlier today on Your Morning, suggesting she would handle Donald Trump with a velvet glove but an iron fist. So very clearly, anyone who's trying to come into a position of power federally right now is trying to make sure that they are making the case for how they could best handle Donald Trump, really shifting some of the political conversations and dynamics about what the ballot question could be in that coming election.
And we're still trying to figure out how real this threat is. Everybody says we need to take it very seriously from Donald Trump, but people also noticed that when he was asked about it, sort of an off-the-cuff answer. Yeah, I think we're going to bring them in on February the 1st. Very sort of nonchalant about something that could have a huge impact on the Canadian economy. And the Premier is heading to Washington next month, so it's kind of full court press, as we say, trying to convince different American decision makers, if not Trump himself, perhaps those around him, to back off.
Absolutely. And I think that is the way that the Canadian government is trying to take this approach of both making the case directly to Trump and his administration, but knowing there are probably other ears they can bend in other parts of the United States that they could help lend their argument to. And we've been hearing from premiers and the federal government over the last few days about how this is not necessarily something new. They were ready for Donald Trump to be this kind of leader and make these passing comments. Or, at 8 o'clock at night, we're all back here parsing over what Donald Trump's latest musings about tariffs were. So there is a sense that we're all just kind of like buckled up and on on this ride. And the federal government and provincial governments are trying to take the approach of being ready, taking this seriously for Donald Trump to make good on this threat and trying to ride the waves of the various parsings of his various phrasings about what's happening with tariffs. We heard from Doug Ford earlier today, kind of getting into what I think is an interesting argument about him needing a clear mandate from Ontarians, because he said if these tariffs are coming in, he views that they absolutely will. He needs a stronger mandate to spend potentially billions of dollars to support Ontarians and workers. David Eby yesterday suggesting that British Columbians should be ready to maybe watch for less California wine on their shelves. So there are a lot of preparations and approaches preparing for whatever Donald Trump puts on the table. And in the meantime, I'll just kind of trying to read the tea leaves between his various comments about Canada and what he intends to do.
Hard to keep up, and it's only been 3 or 4 days. Imagine. Rachel Aiello in Ottawa. Thanks so much for this, Rachel.
Thanks, Todd.